Are the Armenian adjectives reflexes of Indo-European aspirated thought or not?
Which one?
Armenian adjectives.
Adjectives. Oh, well, basically in Armenian there is a sound shift, so it's a bit more complicated. Because there the media aspirated became media, and the aspirates are from the voiceless series. So the Proto-Indo-European voiceless consonants became the aspirated ones in Armenian. So they are not continuously aspirated, because the aspirates have lost their aspiration. We have some Armenian data soon. I can show you better, but one second, please. Oh yeah, but you can see, for instance, here the settlement of tone are reflected as aspirates.
What is PIAG?
This is Proto-Indo-European. So Proto-Indo-European. We need to be a bit too long.
At the beginning of.
So the Proto-Indo-European means the language which was ancestral to all Indo-European languages, and it would be terrible to write all the time Proto-Indo-European. So we just use this abbreviation TIE. Good. So shall we begin? Everyone is there.
Yeah.
Fine. So, we just continue now with the morphology of Indo-European again in just a very simplified view, and then a bit about the prehistory of these languages, and then turn to our other main topic, the Anatolian languages. So, some words about the pronouns, of course, we reconstruct a quite complicated pronominal system. Now, what I show here is the personal pronouns, and observe one thing, something is missing here. And this is the third person, because there were no third person pronouns in the European. They used demonstratives for this purpose. So they, of course, could express the notion it, just to use demonstrative pronouns. This is a kind of prescription or reconstruction, which is nowadays, according to question in some details, basically the pronouns are often debated all the time. I mean the exact reconstructions, but I wanted to point out, because we will discuss it later too, that nowadays this U is not anymore reconstructed with U, but with an E, exactly because of the Anatolian languages that show E, which cannot be explained any other way, but two can be explained. As you can see, it shows a lot of cases. It's again at this problematic point. You can already see here some question marks. If the Proto-Indo-European language already had all of these cases or not, or just some of the core cases. And here down, just like in case of the phonemes, you can also see here how the reconstruction happens. So we have, for instance, ego is attested in these languages, and also the next slide. In Sanskrit as aha, mochas, with azu, Lithuanian ashi, uk, and so on and so on. And you just compare the forms with the sound grows, and you basically arrive to this form. It shows that there are some extended forms. We don't really know why they are extended, but they are attested. As you can see in Hittite, there is uk, in Sanskrit there is aham. So Sanskrit added a kind of particle whose origin is a bit unclear, but actually completely unclear. I thought I added one more. Oh yeah, okay, so there is some disorder. This should come now, because of course we have interrogative and demonstrative pronouns too. As you can see, their reconstruction is a bit more complex, but at least it's more clear than the personal pronouns. Basically, and so on. It can be completely familiar from Latin, and we have a demonstrative pronoun which became, for instance, an article in the Germanic languages. So the article the or the daily does come from this demonstrative pronoun. So let's go back to the numerals. We compare reconstruct value where the entire numeral system, these are the cardinal numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, until 10. And what is interesting is 20 and 100. You have already seen 100. Now it appears here with this reconstruction what I mentioned to you with the D, which shows dupliton, so as a derivation from 10, so 10 times 10. It's also worth observing the number 20, which is Dvidkund, so twice 10. So, and again, the separate examples of the daughter languages. Here, this is not anymore reconstructed in this way, because as you can see also in Armenian, but basically in Greek, Hesperian, and in Bulgarian, there is a stem with an S and an M, and this is now attested also in Anatolian. So here, instead of this inos, we should rather reconstruct something like Sam, Smia. And inos is, and the other forms, they are innovations of the daughter languages. So inos is based actually on Latin unus, but already Sanskrit shows that there's just a stem, a root oi, with a separate suffix, which is ka here, so oikos, and so on. Yeah, that's enough from numerals. You can see further examples. And now some words finally with the verbal morphology. And it's one of the most hotly discussed topics. Again, some things are of course clear. We had only active and middle voice, and passive voice. Tense is again approximately present with an imperfect, there is an aorist and the perfect too. So the problem starts with the mood. We have indicative, that's okay, there's no problem. And many languages, and of course there's imperative, the second problem, yeah?
What is the middle voice?
So in every cases, when the actor is more involved personally than normal, then it's active. This definition doesn't sound very linguistic, but you cannot give a better definition from middle voice. So it's not passive when the action is made upon the subject, but it is a better involvement. So mood, indicative and imperative, that's fine, it's everywhere. The problems are with subjunctive and optative. If we can reconstruct them back to the Proto-Indo-European, or they reflect just a later stage, because they're not attested in Anatolian. So again, the question is it a loss or is it innovation? In verbal morphology, we have basically two types of endings. Traditionally, we call them primary and secondary endings. And this is the distribution, so primary endings appear only in present indicative, and basically only in other cases we use the secondary endings. And for instance, in past indicative, there is, yeah, sorry.
I don't know if you talk about what
operative is wishes, so he shall do something, or I shall do something. So in past forms, some branches, but I've already mentioned the Balkan languages partly and Indo-European languages fully, they use a so-called augment for indicating that it's a past form. Augment is an additional vowel at the very beginning of the verb, so before the root. Actually, originates an a. Imperative may have their own endings too. The verbs themselves fall basically into two classes as far as the root is concerned. There are so-called thematic verbs and athematic verbs. It's again a bit like the thematic nouns. So the thematic verbs insert an a or an o vowel within the root and the ending. We have, of course, participles. Their reconstruction is sometimes a bit complicated, but we have taken three participles: a present one, a middle one, and a perfect participle one. And next to that, we have a lot of verbal adjectives, and these are the basis of later passive forms, like tono, more, and such suffix. I will show you examples too, of course. This is just remarks on the general structure. Now, how these endings look like. So these are the arithmetic endings. So we will have thematic and arithmetic things. So this is arithmetic things of the presented aorist system. So basically the most well-known endings, me, C, T, and so on. And here are the secondary endings. Now you can see the reason behind. So they are quite related. The difference is actually in E, at least in singular. But of course you can argue on the other way around that this is primary, this is secondary, because there's an additional E. It doesn't matter, it's just labeling. And again you can see how we reconstruct them. So in case of the me is very well preserved in many cases, and where not, like Latin, then the disappearance of the finally is completely regular, because finally disappears in Latin. And the secondary endings. Down there, the thematic endings, so they just use direct endings, as you can see here. Now, to make the situation a bit more complex, not every tense and mood uses these endings. For perfect, we have a separate couple of endings, and also for the middle, we have a separate couple of endings. It is just so. So that's, yeah, the reconstructions, now with the verb to know. So you can see here how they look like. We will return once to these endings because they make a specific problem in case of the Anatolian languages. That's why they are there in parentheses, but I explain later why. And then middle has again a different set of endings. Actually, you can summarize these endings in this way. So you have the primary and secondary endings, you have the middle endings here and there, and again, in the case of the thematic forms, there are the primary and secondary endings, and finally you have the perfect endings. It's a bit abstract, so let's, I don't know if you can see it, I hope you can see it. Let's make a paradigm. You know, we are working in paradigms to work together, how it looks like. So we have the verbal stem here, qui, and there is a suffix. In presence, there are a lot of subtypes with different suffixes. I do not mention them enough now. And then the verbal endings, as you can see, in the different present, subjunctive, there is a participle, so at least in active, and you have the middle forms, again indicative, presence, and here a participle. This is an augmented form, so it's not necessarily Proto-Indo-European, it's something like Greco-Aryan form. This is just for fun and to turn slowly to the historical things, because when this system was first reconstructed really in details, people were so enthusiastic about that one of the scholars, August Schleicher, has written a fable in Proto-Indo-European about the sheep and the horses. So this is how we reconstructed in 1868 this story, the sheep and the horses. You can read his reconstruction and the story. But you can see that at that time, Proto-Indo-European looked completely different. Because at that time they heavily based everything upon Sanskrit. So a lot of R's and so on. Now our knowledge is much more nuanced, so this is a new version by Bakers, how we would reconstruct today this story in Proto-Indo-European. This is of course just for fun, but people like to do this. There are at least 10 versions of this story, how to reconstruct it. So, this is how Proto-Indo-European could have sounded, not like Lithuanian, but something something like this. Of course, just to return to these things back, just for a moment, for an example. Yep. So again, just like in case of the phonemes, this is just the point of view of the Proto-Indo-European. If you want to know how Proto-Indo-European developed into Latin, then of course you have to write the entire historical morphology. It's again some hundreds of pages, and to describe how these endings were transformed into, for instance, the Latin endings. And in some very well-known cases like Latin or ancient Greek, you have such handbooks like Historical Phonology and Morphology of Latin or Greek, 500 pages, full with data, extremely interesting readings, by the way. But such things are missing in many cases, for instance, in Anatolian, because it's not that easy to write such things. Now, finally, I want to say some words about the prehistory of these languages. There's no good English term for that. The best is the German term Archäungskunde. It's kind of antique history or antiquity of these languages. It's actually a discipline within discipline. So there are scholars who are not writing anything Indo-European, but they're always focusing on these specific aspects of Proto-Indo-European and Indo-European languages in general. Actually, all researches are based on one key factor, the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European vocabulary. So because we don't reconstruct only phonology and morphology, we have, of course, a lot of words. And with the help of these words, we can tell a lot, in theory at least, about the culture of those peoples who were speaking Proto-Indo-European. But we first need to decide how to reconstruct these words. When can we claim that a given reconstruction is Proto-Indo-European and not something else? And there was two scholars, the French Antoine Meunier and the German Günther Neumann, who were discussing these things many times, so we can even call it as a principle of Meunier and Neumann. It means that obviously one word is not enough. Two words is still not enough. Two words from two different branches, it can be a simple coincidence. So we need at least 3 cognate words from 3 different branches. And these branches must not be members of the same group. So 3 words from Balkan languages, say Greek, Armenian, Albanian, that's not a Proto-Indo-European word. That's just a Balkan Indo-European word. That's not enough. And the same goes for neighboring languages. So it's not enough if you have a Greek and another European word, because it may still reflect a later development. So these 3 branches shall not be genetically or areally combined or coming from the same neighborhood. And what we need, ideally, is also some Eastern and Indo-Iranian word. And if you have a Tokharian or an Anatolian data, is even better, because it's one more argument that it's really Proto-Indo-European. Unfortunately, Tokharian and Anatolian, our knowledge on the vocabulary of Tokharian and Anatolian is quite restricted. So you cannot say that, oh, this is not attested in Anatolian, then it is not Proto-Indo-European. This cannot be said, because you just don't know. Because you hardly know in many cases the vocabulary of these languages. In general, it's a very important thing that absence of evidence in this case is not an evidence. Because most of these languages, set aside languages like Latin, Greek, or Sanskrit, are not known fully. So if we cannot reconstruct a word, we do not know if we cannot reconstruct because it did not exist, or just it was not transmitted in our sources. So what we can use is only what we can really reconstruct. Unfortunately, this principle of Meunier and Neumann is often neglected, and you can find a lot of Proto-Indo-European reconstructions that are attested actually only in some of the branches. Which does not mean that they are not Proto-Indo-European, they can be, just you cannot prove. So when you are reconstructing anything about the culture of the speakers of Proto-Indo-European, you must be quite assured that the reconstructions that we use are indeed from Proto-Indo-European. Now, mainly three: religion of the speakers of Proto-Indo-European, their poetic language, if it existed at all, and of course the key thing, the homeland, where and when Proto-Indo-European was spoken.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
This Meyer and Neumann method, how much difference do we see in this one? For example, in the reconstructions done in accordance with this principle,
it filters out a lot of words. So most of the remaining words are very numerous, but it really filters out a lot of words. So there's a big difference.
for example, can we write that table using the reconstructions of Meyer and Neumann?
Yeah, absolutely. So it does not restrict our knowledge actually. So it doesn't mean that we have to throw out everything. It just gives us a much more precise knowledge. Actually, the Proto-Indo-European dictionaries do not really differentiate, at least typographically, between these levels of reconstruction. So for instance, if you open the lexicon of the Indo-European verbs, but they end in footnote that, for instance, this verb is attested only in these and these branches. So you will see it immediately. But it would be more useful to also to separate it in different chapters or something like that, but this is not done until now. For instance, in our dictionary, protecting unit, where we write an Anatolian dictionary, philological and etymological, we separate the different etymological levels. So we have Proto-Ludic level, Proto-Anatolian level, Core-Indo-European level, so non-Anatolian level, and Proto-Indo-European level. So you can just list the different stages. Yeah, religion. I will just say some very short words about these topics, especially because all of them, religion, economy, homeland, are never-ending topics, and hardly anything is assured. But you will always find, regarding religion, is the theory of Georges Dumézil, a French scholar, who was, by the way, an expert of a language called Ubykh, which was spoken here in northwestern Turkey, and he belonged to one of those who described the language. That was his positive side. His negative side was his involvement in Indo-European linguistics, because when he claimed that the Proto-Indo-European speakers, and actually all later speakers, originally had a kind of tripartite ideology. So everything can be explained within the society and within the religion of the Proto-Indo-Europeans and Indo-Europeans in three functions. There's a sacral, there's a martial, there's a aspect, and the third one is the fertility aspect. But it lacks any philological foundation. So he just picked up languages or different parts of the society from India, from Greece, or from the Germanic world, and compiled them, saying that they belong to the sacral aspect, they belong to the martial aspect. So it was absolutely, so it was a very creative thinking. I didn't have a lot of books about that, but there's absolutely no coherence in it. So this is now abandoned, absolutely. Instead, what we can do is really going back to the language, but it doesn't really help. So we can reconstruct some theonyms, very, very few, like Deus Picard, so the sky god. But beyond that, very few, which is not surprising if you consider that the two earliest branches that were separated for the first time, they don't really provide a lot of things. Tokyarian, as I mentioned, is known mainly from Buddhist manuscripts, so they won't tell anything about Proto-Indo-European religion. Second, Anatolian is heavily influenced by the local religion, which is a pre-Indo-European religion, and also by ancient Near Eastern beliefs. So again, they have hardly preserved anything. Of course, say in case of the comparison of Greek religion or Indic religions, you can find a lot of things, but that's a much later phase. It's not the Proto-Indo-European phase. That's a similar, probably poetic language. Scholars have already observed that some of the phrases that appear, for instance, in here or Odyssey, has an equivalent in Vedic texts, in Vedic Sanskrit texts. Not only as far as the content is concerned, but also formally. So those famous one, actually, almost practically the only one which is generally accepted, is this phrase, the Klaus Achtiton or Shavak Akshitan. Forget this question mark here. It means immortal fame. And it's a frequent phrase appearing in Greek texts, in Vedic texts, and in Sanskrit. And as the reconstruction shows that this is both words, Shava and Klaus, and Akshitan and Achtiton are cognates. So you can even reconstruct this phrase into Proto-Indo-European as Klaus and Achtiton. And many scholars believe that we can reconstruct a lot of such formulae. The problem is that you have such beautiful correspondences in very few cases. So some scholars said that, okay, it's not a problem if they are formally not cognate. You can change one of the words if it means the same. So, for instance, not Klaus, but another word that means fame. But of course, methodologically speaking, this is nonsense, because with this logic you can compare anything with anything. This is the first problem. Second, as it written here, most of these phrases show Greek and Indo-Iranian cognates. It's very nice, but I mean too late. Finally, and it refers even to this case, it appears here as a phrase. But actually in the text, they are not necessarily next to each other. So it's even questionable if it's a real phrase at all. Still, there are a lot of scholars who are trying to recover such formulae. And I have to say that Anatolian languages don't show anything similar, absolutely nothing similar, which, however, may be attributed to the genres, because we don't have epic texts from Anatolia. We do have, but they are translations from ancient Near Eastern texts, so we don't have a local epic poetry. Now, finally, the homeland question. That's a nightmare, literally. So, since the beginning of the European studies, there were so many suggestions. Someone, I think it was Mallory, who has written his PhD from collecting all the suggestions. That's around like the 50s, 60s. So the homeland was located everywhere, from the African deserts until the Arctic area. I'm not joking. Of course, most of them are just, well, to be honest, rubbish. But there are still a lot of theories that have good arguments. So, but at the end you can reduce it to a reasonable number. But still the problem is we don't really know how to answer these questions, when and where Proto-Indo-European was spoken. The key thing is, of course, that wherever you put it, doesn't matter. You should be able to explain why the daughter languages are spoken there where they are tested. This is the so-called total distribution principle. Wherever you put it, you have to explain why Anatolian is spoken in Anatolia and why Tokharian is spoken in the Tarim Basin. And not like you are just drawing an arrow that, okay, they went there. No, no, no. Of course, these regions are known archaeologically, so you just cannot move them. It's not a game. You have to reason. You have to explain these wanderings. And then we are back at the main pitfall. As I said, these regions are very well known archaeologically, but we are speaking about linguistic categories. We are talking about languages. And archaeological categories, or archaeological culture, has basically nothing to do with any linguistic unit. There are cases when they are overlapping, or they are sometimes identical, but they're basically different categories. You just cannot say that culture X used language Y. This is extremely rare. And of course, they are not identical to the genetic categories either, despite some recent publications, again in Nature and such journals. So practically, this is a real problem, because when you need to explain how Anatolian languages appear in Anatolia, or Tokharian languages appear in the Tarim Basin, you still need to work with archaeological categories, because that's all that we have. So, of course, this would be a secondary problem if we could independently identify when and where Indo-European was spoken, Proto-Indo-European was spoken. It's not that easy. If there were any known relatives of Proto-Indo-European, that would help, but there isn't. Until now, it was not possible to identify. in brackets, I must mention a theory which is used by some post-Soviet and American scholars. It is called nostrative theory, but they claim that some of the, and in different versions, many of the Eurasian language families, or sometimes even Half-Asian, are related, but this is not accepted in historical linguistics at all, because they are not using the methodology of historical linguistics. A much more fruitful case is, or rather would be, yeah.
Can you talk about how the linguistic ontology is nautical vocabulary works?
That comes next. I'll just finish the linguistic connections. So it would be much more fruitful if we can identify loan words in Proto-Indo-European or loan words from Proto-Indo-European into any neighboring language families. Because if there are such things, then the two proto-languages or languages must have been neighbors, and they have a lot. And indeed, one of the key arguments used today is that Uralic, so the common ancestor of Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian, and many other languages, shows some Proto-Indo-European loan words. This is generally accepted. I personally am not convinced. I had a talk 2 years ago in Leiden University where I argued that there are so few and they are so problematic that just you can't prove it. That's my view, but basically it is accepted. And if this is true, then Proto-Indo-European must have been spoken next to Proto-Uralic somewhere. It doesn't really have, because we don't really know where Proto-Uralic was spoken. Okay, somewhere in today's Russia on either side of the Uralic mountains, but we don't know exactly. So it would mean that also Proto-Indo-European must have been spoken there, say in the Steppe region or something like that. Funnily, those people who accept Uralic loanwords, they also accept sometimes the Kartvelian loanwords. Kartvelian is a language family spoken in Georgia and in Turkey. So the last language, Lascia, belongs to Kartvelian, together with Magdalenian, Swan, and Georgian. And scholars claim that there are loanwords into Kartvelian. I again belong to a skeptical group, but it's another question. The funny thing is that it's obviously not really possible physically, geographically, because if you put the Indo-European languages, say, in the Steppe area, then they can have a contact with Uralic languages, but not really with the Kartvelian languages, because they are more southern, and you have Caucasus mountains in between, and you just cannot cross that easily. Not to mention that Kartvelian should be located a bit more southern. So geographically it doesn't really work. So this is an ongoing debate, as practically everything, especially because it requires the cooperation of many specialists. So those who are Indo-European specialists usually have limited knowledge on Uralic, not to mention Kartvelian, and not to mention the other way around. This is still not assured. Linguistic paleontology. It has, so to say, an older version which failed, and now there's a newer version which seems to have. The older version was that you can reconstruct the language if you contain a lot of terms regarding fauna and flora. So animal names, tree names, whatever. You look at the map, for instance, the beach is widespread, but not everywhere. So if there's a word for beach, the tree beach, then Proto-Indo-European must have been spoken somewhere around. Or if you have a word for salmon, then Proto-Indo-European must be spoken somewhere in the neighborhood. The problem is always reconstruction, because the words that mean beach, they don't necessarily mean beach in every language, and then the question is which tree name should be reconstructed properly. And not to mention that, okay, so not every Proto-Indo-European speakers are biologists, so they of course might have misunderstood some trees were similar. So, but the main problem is that you may have words in your language that refer to animals or trees or whatever, but you don't have it. In Hungarian, there's a word for camel, teve. It's a lot of Turkish. Of course, you don't have camels in Hungary. You never have. still we have. So these historical linguists with this logic would put the Hungarian homeland somewhere in Africa, saying that here comes. No, it doesn't work. So that's why the tree names, animal names, and such things are not used anymore for locating the Proto-European homeland. But they have instead, and this is in the focus of new research, that they refer to objects too, which are, however, new things. So they were invented once in human history, and you can date this invention. So, and of course, you cannot limit it geographically, because of course you can have a word for yolk without having yolk, just like in case of camel. But you cannot have a word for yolk before the invention of yolk. And now scholars are analyzing the vocabulary from this point of view, and it shows that the speakers of Proto-Indo-European must have lived in the so-called Neolithic times, so they already know what is agriculture, cattle breeding. They knew a lot of secondary products like wool and yolk, for instance. And if you collect all these words together, then you can see, and date it with archaeological tools, you can claim that Proto-Indo-European must have been spoken after 5000 BC. You can say that, okay, it's not a very precise thing, but it will help a lot to us, as you will see soon. There is not terminology, there's terminology. And of course, people try to use even more specific vocabulary, for instance, the wheeled vehicle terminology, because wheeled vehicles are even later innovations. But the problem is again that you cannot reconstruct wheeled vehicle terminology on Proto-Indo-European, only for a later phase. At best, the core or nuclear Indo-European. And again, then it doesn't really have in dating. As I said, there are billions of theories, but if actually you can restrict them, so if you throw out the really silly ones and you combine those that actually derivation of each other or so, at the end you have actually two hypotheses. And even today the discussion is involved or around these two hypotheses. One of them is the Anatolian homeland hypothesis. This was created by a British archaeologist called Colin Renfrew, one of the leading archaeologists. And in the original version was that Proto-Indo-European was spoken in Çatalhöyük, in the Neolithic art of Çatalhöyük, not far from Konya. And then they spread into Europe and then into the steppe and so on. The basic problem was linguistic. It's archaeologically is fine, the basic problem was linguistic. As I said, we require a homeland after 5000 BC. And this is much earlier, it's 2000 years earlier. And at that time, there were many innovations that did not exist at that time. So, linguistically speaking, it's not possible. However, Renfrew and some of his followers, the Zwerabils modified this theory, claiming, you can see here 3 stages, that there was a stage, this is somewhere here, that included practically Central Europe, Balkans, and Western Turkey, a bit earlier than 5000 BC, and that would be then the Proto-Indo-European homeland. That sounds much better, both archaeologically and linguistically. But this is just an updated version, and no details are discussed or elaborated. So it has good chances, but it's still unproven and it has problems. Indo-European linguists basically reject this theory due to the above-mentioned problem of the linguistic paleontology, but at the same time they do not take into account that that is the older version and there is a much younger version of the theory too. But Indo-European linguists love is this theory, the archaeological theory, is the steppe homeland hypothesis. It has different versions. The most recent version is by David Anthony, an American archaeologist. As you can see, homeland is at the steppe region. Then you can have the Uralic loanwords, and he's writing these, drawing these arrows, how the different tribes, first Anatolians, Then the Tocharians and the other ones separated from this region. The main problem is that's an archaeological nonsense. There is an influx into Central Europe. You can even see it in the genetical pattern. There is absolutely no influx in Anatolia. So any connection with the Anatolian cultures and the steppe cultures does not exist. Absolutely doesn't exist. And thus, this theory cannot explain the origin of the Anatolian languages. And this date, that 4000 BC, this was the date of the entrance of the Anatolian languages in Anatolia, this sheer guesswork. That's absolute nonsense. So actually, we have two hypotheses, the steppe one and the Anatolian one, and none of them is working. Of course, the followers of both hypotheses are very enthusiastic and they claim that this is the only and real truth. Actually, none of them is working. We still need a lot of work to do. So I leave the question, of course, open. Not to mention that just a side remark, that this datings, Anthony is changing the datings quite frequently. Of course, because you can write here anything that you wish if there is no entrance to Anatolia. Just finally, but I did not include in the handout, it's a technical thing, because I included in the handout the handbooks. But we have, of course, some journals that they appear quite regularly, and they are usually in English and in German, or usually in German and sometimes in English. And these are the leading ones, where you can find the latest literature all the time. And scholars of the Indo-European studies regularly gather, and basically they have two types of, but of course a lot of conferences. Basically they have an Achtalung and an Einheitstagung. Achtalung is the conference for every Indo-Europeanist, and Einheitstagung is always focusing on one specific topic. They are more frequent than the Achtalung, and they are published in separate volumes. So this was the Proto-Indo-European part, quite shortly. As you can see, hopefully, there are still a lot of open questions. So let's for the research if you are interested. And now, we will continue with the Anatolian branch. Take a deeper look from every point of view. That is, both synchronically and diachronically. So, the first question is when the Anatolian languages were spoken. It's not that easy. Of course, you can say, oh, we have the texts, we can take them. Oh no, of course, the situation is more complicated. Because the first texts that are originated from Anatolia are from a period called Old Assyrian Colony period. They are found mainly in Kultepe, south of the Kızılırmak.
What language group does Hittite language go into?
Anatolian. So.
Oh, that's also good.
Yeah, I will show you the members immediately. Maybe I should start with members, and yeah, let's start with members, and then after the dating. So we have the Anatolian batch with the following members: Hittite, Luwian, it has some varieties, Palaic, then Lycian, what we call Lycian A, because there's a Lycian B too. So they are two quite closely related varieties, and we'll talk about it later. But some scholars call Lycian B as Milian, which is probably a misnomer. Then we have the Lydian, Carian, Pisidian, and Sididic. If you talk about the members, we will talk more detailed too. We should talk about the non-members too. Because Anatolian branch is a linguistic term, but not all Anatolian languages are Anatolian. So Anatolian can be used also in a geographic sense, and then it includes a lot of other languages too. For instance, Hattian. Let's have a look at the map. So here are the members. Hittite was spoken somewhere here originally, and later also in this area. because this became the center of the Hittite Empire. Luwian was spoken here in the southern regions. Maybe here too, this is what we do not know, because this area is linguistically not very clear. We have here Lycian, A and B, Calian. Pisidian will be spoken here in Pisidia, Sidiotic is in Pamphylia, and Lydian is somewhere here and not up there, and Palay. As you can see, there is a blank spot here. It is because the original language of the population here was the Khattian language, this one. This is a non-Indo-European language. Now, the language is known to be related to Khattian. Some scholars believe that they are related to northwestern Caucasian languages, that is Abkhaz and related things, but they are not related, according to our current knowledge. Khattians had a deep influence on the Hittites in cultural terms, and we have some texts too. Other known members include the Kashgar. The Kashgar was a tribe in this northern area, actually in a form of a crescent, and we actually do not know what kind of language was spoken by the Kashgar. But we know that the Hittites considered them as non-Hittites, so we presume that they were speaking something different. Phrygian. I already mentioned Phrygian. You know it already. That's a separate member of the Indo-European languages, and they came later, after the collapse of the, or rather the disintegration of the Hittite Empire. And of course, we have a lot of other Indo-European languages here, Armenian, Kurdish, but they arrive always later. Then, in Eastern Anatolia, we have Hurrian and Urartian. They are in ancient Near Eastern languages. They are related to each other, but we don't know if they are related to any other language. Some people, Russian scholars, believe that they are related to northeastern Caucasian languages like Chechen and so on. There is no proof for that. I mentioned the Carthian languages that are partly spoken here in Anatolia and the last. Again, they are just geographically speaking Anatolian languages. And Etruscan, Erkin already asked, there are some scholars who believe that Etruscan is in fact related to Luwian or Lydian, and thus it would be an Anatolian language, but it is not. That's, until now it's quite clear. And finally, we mentioned earlier the substrate languages, and Greek has some substrate, at least one, but maybe more languages, and people love to connect them with Anatolian languages. Again, there is no proof for that. The only proof is that there are some similar toponyms both in Anatolia and in the Aegean, but it doesn't tell too much about these languages. So these are the non-members of the Anatolian language.
I think I missed, but where does this language Kashgar spoken?
Kashgar was spoken in the north of central Anatolia, basically in this region, in such a crescent form. It's attested in the Hittite period, say from 1500 until the Neo-Hittite period around 700. This is the last Neo-Assyrian sources mentioned a Kashgar tribal leader somewhere here, but I don't know what kind of language they use.
And Luwian was extending all the way to Western Asia Minor. I think the only remnants are found in Hatay, in Antioquia.
No, I will show a better map about Luwian. This is a bit outdated because now we wouldn't call it Luwian, we call it Luvik, but I will return to this point. Yes, in Hatay they have a lot of inscriptions, but for that I will have a better map. So this is a short description of the members, but I will discuss both the geography and the chronology of these languages a bit more detail. And now back to the basic question, when these languages were spoken at all. So our very first texts from Anatolia are not Hittite and Luwian texts, but cuneiform tablets that were written in a dialect of Assyrian, it's a Semitic language. And these are texts used by Assyrian merchants who were working in Anatolia in the 20th, 19th century BC. And these texts preserve some Hittite and Luwian names and Hittite and Luwian loanwords. So these are the absolute earliest evidence for Indo-European languages in general. Some of them became quite widespread in Semitic languages, and it was even borrowed to other languages. So in Turkish, interpreter is something like tercüman, if I remember correctly. It goes back to this old Assyrian word, targummanum, which is interpreter, and targummanum is a loan from a Luwian word, targummai, which means something like interpret. So actually, you even have, at the very end, in Turkish, a word which goes back to a Luwian loan word. This is quite few what we have, of course, in these old Assyrian texts, because they are in Assyrian, but still they are very valuable source. Yeah.
Maybe this is a good question, but how related is like Hittite and the Farsi language? Are they related in any way? Or
of course, they are both Indo-European languages, but they wouldn't understand each other. Some basic words are very similar, but you need to be a linguist to see that the connection, that they are really connected. So thus we can date the first attestation of the languages in the 20th century. It may happen that we have some even older evidence. In Eblite, this is a Semitic language spoken in northern Syria. Eblite is a term called Maldiv. So in Eblite, there's a term, ziyu. It's a kind of vessel. And some of this, one specialist of this language suggested, because this is not a Semitic word, so this specialist suggested that this is a loan word from Hittite ziri, which again means a kind of vessel. But this is possible. And it would mean, of course, because Eblite is restricted to this 24th century BC, that the ever first evidence for Indo-European languages and the Hittite is this loan word Eblite. This is not proven, of course, but sounds quite plausible. And the question is when they died out as a group. Of course, every language died out in different periods. The last attested member is the language called Pisidian, where the inscriptions are dated, the latest inscriptions are dated to the 3rd century AD. However, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of church fathers who are mentioning local languages. And we even have a legend of Saint Martha. I think she was the mother of Simeon the Beloved. Anyway, the legend is from the 6th century, and it mentions a guy from Lycaonia who still needed a Greek interpreter when he wanted to say something, because he knew only the local language, Lycaonian, which is related to Lycian, so it must be one of the languages. So it is possible that at least in some remote areas among the mountains, these languages were spoken also in the second half of the 6th century AD. But of course, we don't have material. The material is attested only until the 3rd century AD. Where? Well, of course, basically in Anatolia, there is nothing new in that. The distribution is not that simple, however. If you look at this map, you can observe first here what I mentioned, that there was a blank spot here, the origin and the Anatolian language was spoken. At least we assume, because when our sources appear, then Luwian and Hittite was already spoken here together with Hattian, but still we believe that they are intruders. And the original eastern border was the Euphrates. Nevertheless, we have some evidence that some of these languages were spoken also in these islands in front of Anatolia, and due to the conquest of northern Syria by the Hittite Empire, Hittite and Luwian became spoken also in northern Syria.
What came after that? What came beyond Euphrates? The river Euphrates, you told me there is a border. What comes beyond?
That's a very good question. We do know that Hurrian is attested somewhere in this region, and Urartian is around the one lake. We have here up along the Black Sea the Carthaginian languages, and in between somewhere we have a blank spot. So we just don't have sources. We have Hittite sources, by the way, that they describe the countries of Atsi and Hayasha here. And they mention the names of local gods and rulers, but we cannot identify these names with any known language. Armenian scholars believe that they are Armenians, but they are not. So actually this is a blank spot, and it remains a blank spot actually until the classical period. And we also don't know when the Cartesian languages arrive here, and we do not know if Kashkar and the Cartesian languages have anything with each other. Actually, sources are missing here, but at the Turkish-Syrian border there is Hurrian and one like this European. So,
but in the classic era, the first nations that we know of is the Armenians, right? Was it?
no, actually, well, in this black spot, yes, but otherwise the Urartian kingdom and the Hurrians are much earlier at the state. So, Armenian has actually loanwords in Urartian because they arrived to territories where Urartian was spoken before the Armenians. Yeah, and there is one more extension, a fun extension, that Kyrian happened to be spoken also in Egypt, because in the 7th century, Greek and Kyrian mercenaries were working, literally, they were guest workers in Egypt. They were fighting for the pharaoh, and they left a lot of inscriptions in Egypt. So many of our Kyrian texts are from Kyrian, from Egyptian tombstones. You will see some of these. And again, I want to point out that despite some of the claims, there is no evidence for Anatolian languages in the Greek mainland and in Crete. So this is a possibility, of course, that they belong to these pre-Greek substrates, but there is no conclusive proof for that.
What kind of inscriptions did Kyrians leave in Egypt? Is it only tombstones, or?
No, not only tombstones. There are also graffitis on Egyptian tombstones in style like I was here, and so on and so on. And we have also longer graffitis, but we cannot decipher them. We can read them and we don't understand them. But most of them are gravestones. So these are the members, these are the non-members. Now internal classification, a beloved topic. Of course, it's quite clear that Hittite stands against the other Anatolian languages, that's clear. We also have a group of languages called Luwic. That's also absolutely clear. And what is not clear is the position of Lydian and Palaic. So now you can see this. This is, say, the most accepted classification by a scholar called Irakmovich. But there are scholars who argue that Lydian belongs to Luwic group. This is a possibility. The problem is that both Lydian and Palaic are hardly attested and hardly understood. And of course, if you don't have text, they just can't decide. So this is a bit messy here. The point, but Luwic and Hittite is clear. So Luwic looks like this. These are really close dialects. It's like Germanic languages. So they stand really close to each other. One can even argue that, for instance, Luwian was hardly separated from. So Luwian and all of the other were just two members in the 2nd millennium. Of course, this is just speculation, but they are so close to each other. Now, in the following, I will just discuss the name of these languages, where and when they were spoken, the writing system in a bit more detailed way than earlier, a bit about the social linguistic situation if we know. I will show some phonological and morphological charts, very simplified. Fortunately, some of the languages are hardly attested, so I cannot show anything. And sample text. These are the most interesting things, I think, especially because at the beginning we will understand the text, and at the end we won't understand the text, because we just don't. And you will see why. So let's start with Hittite. It's a modern term. It's from the different translations of the Bible. And although it goes back to the ancient term is Hatti and not Hittite. So it happens so that I mentioned the Hattians, the former speaker, the original speaker in the Tuzuriman area. And that's why the region was called also Hatti. And when the Hittites conquered this, they called their own empire also Hatti. So they inherited this term. And then the people outside of the Hittite empire were also calling them Hatti. And the Hittite word is coming from this through the Bible. But originally it refers to a completely different language group, And we do know how the Hittites called themselves. they call the language of the city of Nesha. This is Kürtelen and south of Kızılırmak. And somehow they connected themselves with that specific city. I already mentioned that the first Hittite elements are attested in all the Syrian texts, and Hittite disappeared with the collapse of the Hittite Empire in the early 12th century. We do not know how this disappearance happened. So it might have happened that there were some villages still in the 12th century where Hittite was spoken, but there is no evidence for that. It was basically spoken in Central Anatolia, as you can see also on the map, and it was written with a classic form of the cuneiform, so it's not like the old Persian cuneiform. No, that's a typical real cuneiform, which was borrowed from northern Syria. It had two phases, surprisingly ordered. New Hittite. Now we decided that Middle Hittite doesn't exist, it's just the transitional phase. Of course, Hittite was the official language of the Hittite Empire. And what is interesting is that Hittite stood under the growing influence of Luwian, because there were a lot of Luwian speakers all around the empire. And it had, as a result, why it's not here? Okay. You will see the Luwian. I will show you a diagram about the social linguistic situation, about this bilingual situation of Hittite. Basically, it meant that at the end of the empire, there were no Hittite monolingual speakers. There were only Hittite Luwian bilingual speakers, and everyone else was practically Luwian speaking person. So probably this has also contributed to the extinction of Hittite.
So can we deduce that the Hittites actually were the elite who were ruling the country or something? Why weren't there any monolinguals in Hittite?
Sorry, I did not hear you.
Well, why isn't there any monolingual Hittite speakers?
Well, originally there were. So this Luwian influence appears quite late. It starts in this transitional period, actually. And why this happens, that's another question. We do know that Hittite kings relocated a lot of population, mainly from Western Anatolia. So it might have happened that they just introduced a lot of Luwian speakers in the society. So, but we don't know really. We can just observe these changes, that the Hittite grammatical categories become like the Luwian categories. So they lose a lot of categories that they had, and there's a lot of Luwian loanwords in the new Hittite text. It means hundreds of loanwords. So it's really a kind of Luwianizing process. This is what we can observe, but the reasons behind it we don't really know. I'll show you Hittite phoneme inventory here. There is no problem with the vowels. The problems are basically here if it had a glottal stop or not. Some scholars, including myself, accept or argue that there was a glottal stop, others not. We have here the laryngeals, or even in a legalized version. We have a traditional transcription with a big H and a small h for linguists for European purposes, but we don't know the exact phonetic realization. Tricky thing is this S. So due to the version of the cuneiform and due to some phonetic things, we used the series that we transcribed in an ash and a hachek. So upon this, which is usually perceived as an ash, but we have good arguments. It denoted the phoneme S. So it had only S and no ash. Nevertheless, since like here in the city of Nesha, since when it was deciphered, this was not clear. There are two traditions to pronounce the Hittite names that contain a sibilant. One of them is pronouncing the ash, the other one is the S. Actually, this is just tradition. The main thing is to know that it's, phonetically speaking, this is S. I tend to pronounce it in ash, but it's just how you learn in the university. I just easily gave here stops as voiceless and voice stops. That's a bit more complicated. Well, it's quite complicated. I will return to that at the question of the history of Anatolian languages. because it will have a very serious role. Hittite declension, simplified, but you have to observe here, as I mentioned, there is no feminine, there is a so-called commune, a non-neuter, and a neuter form. Again, what you also have is a special case ending ergative, I will talk about later. And what you also have to observe is the lack of distinction of ablative and instrumental in singular and plural. These are all important features from an Indo-European point of view, because they lead to the question if something was lost here, or the other Indo-European languages innovated something.
Genitive, dative, and locative grouped together, or do
I am just missing here a line, so genitive is Arché, and dative, locative is one case in our concept. Something during the transformation. Hittite conjugation, that's again a quite simplified thing, but you have to observe, Jackson.
Was a later present in Proto-Indo-European?
Sorry?
Was a later case present in Proto-Indo-European?
Relative,
Yes.
you mean? This one.
And I don't know what that does mean, but
Into the direction to something. People usually say that no, it was not. But it's debated. So there are some arguments it could be. But basically it's assumed that it is no, it's an innovation. Oh, that's not that. Sorry. So back to conjugation, what we have to observe here is the simplicity first. So we have an imperative and an indicative, and that's all. Second, we have two types of conjugation. There's so-called me conjugation and a he conjugation. At least in singular, present and preterm. This is a lexical feature of the Hittite verb. So it's either a me verb or a he verb. You have to learn it, and then you learn Hittite. Remember about the endings, because this will also cause a big problem for us when we discuss the Untitled languages history. Yeah.
It sounds like I think in Arabic there's some kind of distinction like this, Kameri and Shemsi, right?
no, that's about the letter.
Is that what that is? So what kind of distinction is this? Me, he?
Nothing. That's a lexical thing. So some of the verbs conjugate according to the me pattern, some of the verbs conjugate according to the he pattern. There is absolutely no distinction. It's just a lexical feature. So there is no functional difference.
Just like the articles, I guess.
In a given sense, yes. You have to learn also the article, and there is no logic behind it. It's just a lexical feature. This will cause problems because we know the he endings from other languages, but there they have a specific function which is not listed here. I will come to that later. Now let's look at some text. How does Hittite look like at all? So we know Hittite from cuneiform tablets. They are clay tablets. The size can be from this until quite big. If you go to the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, to the main buildings, not in the nearest collection, you can find a lot of cuneiform tablets on display. They look like this. They're quite nice. But most of them you can read online. In bibliography, I made a reference to the concordance. This is an online database. You just type the identification markers like this here, and you get the text, the photo, and the editions, and this bibliographical data, and anything you want to read about it. This is a ritual for the royal couple, and this is a drawing of the part, this part, drawing, and now the transcription of the first 3 paragraphs, and also the translation. What you can see here is these words that are written with capitals. They are the logograms. So, for instance, Lugal means king as a logogram. We happen to know that it's in Hittite Hashush, just because it's sometimes written as Hashush. That's not always so. So, for instance, we don't know how the Hittite word for son sounds. I mean the kinship term, because it's always written like here, Dumu. So we understand it means son, but we don't know how it is to be read. And these are the logograms have two types, by the way. Those that originate in Sumerian language, and those that originate in Akkadian language, they're in italics. Again, actually it doesn't matter. These are perceived as logograms, and we don't always know how the Hittite pronunciation was. As you can see, we transcribe the signs by sign, and then you can always make a bound transcription, which is a bit more close. It's a bit closer to the real pronunciation, but still, this is just a convention. So a phonetic interpretation is at the next level. As you can see, we understand quite well the Hittite text. Yeah.
Cuneiform have any correspondence with the phonetic structure, or just like Chinese pictogram?
How do you mean any connections?
I mean, does it help? So, for example, if you recognize some kind of a line, so if it's 3 lines, it's pronounced.
Yeah,
you just memorize it.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing. So it's basically because all of the syllabic codes go back to logograms. So originally, all cuneiform signs were like hieroglyphic signs, so they showed something. So the sign for Ninda, this is not listed here, which means bread, originally looked like that kind of bread, but at this time it was just a couple of veggies. And
so one piece of cuneiform meant one entity or word.
yeah, in the very, very beginning, but it's not in the Hittite period, but the Sumerian period in southern Iraq, say 2,000 years, 1,500 years before the Hittite Empire. So
But did they write the grammatical particles as well, or?
at the very beginning, no. It came later, when the logographic function, next to the logographic function, also the syllabic function appeared. So, for instance, those signs that were read as T, because there was a word T, they could have been used also for a syllable T. So they started to use these logograms also in this function. But all this happened really thousands of years earlier than the Hittite period, and this time it was so abstract, as you can see, and absolutely no connection between the writing and the content. Yeah, unfortunately, actually. Luvian.
Maybe we can give a break before.
If you wish, yes, definitely. So
I guess then people need some refreshment.
okay, then. So we
I will change timing, yeah.